were about 40 men on her deck, armed with muskets, blunderbusses, cutlasses, long knives, dirks, etc., 2 cannonades, one a 12, the other a 6 pounder. She was a schooner, wearing the patriot flag, blue, white and blue, of the Republic of Mexico. I thought it not prudent to resist them should they be pirates, with a crew of 7 men and only 5 muskets. Accordingly ordered the arms and ammunition to be immediately stowed away in as secret a place as possible, and suffer her to speak us, hoping and believing that a republican flag indicated both honor and friendship from those who wore it, and which we might expect even from Spaniards. But how great was my astonishment, when the schooner having approached very near us, hailed in English, and ordered me to heave my boat out immediately, and come on board of her with my papers. Accordingly my boat was hove out, but filled before I could get into her. I was then ordered to tack ship and lay by for the pirates' boat to board me, which was done by Bolidar, their first lieutenant, with 6 or 8 Spaniards, armed with as many of the before mentioned weapons as they could well sling about their bodies. They drove me into the boat, and 2 of them rowed me to their privateer, as they called their vessel, where I shook hands with their commander, Captain Jonea, a Spaniard, who before looking at my papers, ordered Bolidar, his lieutenant, to follow the Mexican in, back of the key they had left, which was done. At 6 o'clock P.M. the Exertion was anchored in 11 feet of water near this vessel, and an island which they called 12 League Key, called by the chart Key Largo, about 30 or 35 leagues from Trinidad. After this strange conduct they began examining my papers by a Scotchman who went by the name of Nickola, their sailing master. He spoke good English, had a countenance rather pleasing, although his beard and mustachios had a frightful appearance. His face, apparently full of anxiety, indicated something in my favour. He gave me my papers, saying, "Take good care of them, for I am afraid you have fallen into bad hands." The pirates' boat was then sent to the Exertion with more men and arms. A part of them left on board her, the rest returning with 3 of my crew to their vessel, viz. Thomas Young, Thomas Goodall, and George Reed. They treated them with something to drink, and offered them equal shares with themselves, and some money, if they would enlist, but they could not prevail on them. I then requested permission to go on board my vessel, which was granted, and further requested Nickola should go with me, but was refused by their captain, who vociferated in a harsh manner, "No, no, no," accompanied with a heavy stamp upon the deck. When I got on board I was invited below by Bolidar, where I found they had emptied the case of liquors, and broken a cheese to pieces and crumbled it on the table and cabin floor. The pirates, elated with their prize, as they called it, had drank so much as to make them desperately abusive. I was permitted to lie down in my berth; but reader, if you have ever been awakened by a gang of armed desperadoes, who have taken possession of your habitation in the midnight hour, you can imagine my feelings. Sleep was a stranger to me, and anxiety was my guest. Bolidar, however, pretended friendship, and flattered me with the prospect of being soon set at liberty. But I found him, as I suspected, a consummate hypocrite. Indeed, his very looks indicated it. He was a stout and well built man, of a dark, swarthy complexion, with keen, ferocious eyes, huge whiskers, and beard under his chin and on his lips, 4 or 5 inches long. He was a Portuguese by birth, but had become a naturalized Frenchman; had a wife, if not children, as I was told, in France, and was well known there as a commander of a first rate privateer. His appearance was truly terrific. He could talk some English, and had a most lion like voice. Tuesday, 18th. Early this morning the captain of the pirates came on board the Exertion, took a look at the cabin stores and cargo in the state rooms, and then ordered me back with him to his vessel, where he, with his crew, held a consultation for some time respecting the cargo. After which the interpreter, Nickola, told me that the captain had, or pretended to have, a commission under General Traspelascus, commander in chief of the Republic of Mexico, authorizing him to take all cargoes whatever of provisions bound to any royalist Spanish port; that my cargo being bound to an enemy's port must be condemned, but that the vessel should be given up, and be put into a fair channel for Trinidad, where I was bound. I requested him to examine the papers thoroughly, and perhaps he would be convinced to the contrary, and told him my cargo was all American property taken in at Boston, and consigned to an American gentleman, agent at Trinidad. But the captain would not take the trouble, but ordered both vessels under way immediately, and commenced beating up amongst the keys through most of the day, the wind being very light. They now sent their boats on board the Excursion for stores, and commenced plundering her of bread, butter, lard, onions, potatoes, fish, beans, &c. took up some sugar box shocks that were on deck, and found the barrels of apples, selected the best of them, and threw the rest overboard. They inquired for spirits, wine, cider, &c., and were told they had already taken all that was on board. But not satisfied, they proceeded to search the state rooms and forecastle, ripped up the floor of the latter and found some boxes of bottled cider, which they carried to their vessel, gave 3 cheers, in an exulting manner to me, and then began drinking it with such freedom, that a violent quarrel arose between officers and men, which came very near ending in bloodshed. I was accused of falsehood, for saying they had got all the liquors that were on board, and I thought they had. The truth was, I never had any bill of lading of the cider, and consequently had no recollection of its being on board, yet it served them as an excuse for being insolent. In the evening peace was restored, and they sung songs. I was suffered to go below for the night, and they placed a guard over me, stationed at the companion way. Wednesday, 19th. Commenced with moderate easterly winds, beating towards the northeast, the pirates' boats frequently going on board the Exertion for potatoes, fish, beans, butter, &c., which were used with great waste and extravagance. They gave me food and drink, but of bad quality, more particularly the victuals, which were wretchedly cooked. The place assigned me to eat was covered with dirt and vermin. It appeared that their great object was to hurt my feelings with threats and observations, and to make my situation as unpleasant as circumstances would admit. We came to anchor near a key, called by them Brigantine, where myself and mate were permitted to go on shore, but were guarded by several armed pirates. I soon returned to the Mexican, and my mate to the Exertion, with George Reed, one of my crew; the other 2 being kept on board the Mexican. In the course of this day I had considerable conversation with Nickola, who appeared well disposed towards me. He lamented most deeply his own situation, for he was one of those men, whose early good impressions were not entirely effaced, although confederated with guilt. He told me, those who had taken me were no better than pirates, and their end would be the halter; but, he added with peculiar emotion, I will never be hung as a pirate; showing me a bottle of laudanum which he had found in my medicine chest, saying, if we are taken, that shall cheat the hangman, before we are condemned. I endeavoured to get it from him, but did not succeed. I then asked him how he came to be in such company, as he appeared to be dissatisfied. He stated that he was at New Orleans last summer, out of employment, and became acquainted with one Captain Auguste Orgamar, a Frenchman, who had bought a small schooner of about 15 tons, and was going down to the Bay of Mexico to get a commission under General Traspelascus, in order to go a privateering under the patriot flag. Captain Orgamar made him liberal offers respecting shares, and promised him a sailing master's berth, which he accepted and embarked on board the schooner, without sufficiently reflecting on the danger of such an undertaking. Soon after, they sailed from Mexico, where they got a commission, and the vessel was called Mexican. They made up a complement of 20 men, and after rendering the General some little service, in transporting his troops to a place called, proceeded on a cruise, took some small prizes off Campeachy, afterwards came on the south coast of Cuba, where they took other small prizes, and the one which we were now on board of. By this time the crew were increased to about 40, nearly one half Spaniards, the others Frenchmen and Portuguese. Several of them had sailed out of ports in the United States with American protections, but I confidently believe none are natives, especially of the northern states. I was careful in examining the men, being desirous of knowing if any of my countrymen were among this wretched crew, but am satisfied there were none, and my Scotch friend concurred in the opinion. And now, with a new vessel, which was the prize of these plunderers, they sailed up Manganeel Bay. Previously, however, they fell in with an American schooner, from which they bought 4 barrels of beef, and paid in tobacco. At the bay was an English brig belonging to Jamaica, owned by Mr. John Loudon of that place. On board of this vessel the Spanish part of the crew commenced their depredations as pirates, although Captain Orgamar and Nickola protested against it, and refused any participation. But they persisted, and like so many ferocious bloodhounds, boarded the brig, plundered the cabin, stores, furniture, captain's trunks, etc., took a hogshead of rum, one 12-pound carronade, some rigging and sails. One of them plundered the chest of a sailor, who